Welcome to part 2 of Hans Christian Andersen's unbelievably wild and weird obscure stories. Buckle up because this first one starts with horse murder. This one is called Little Klaus and Big Klaus, and it's because in this village there's two dudes named Klaus, and that is how everyone tells them apart. Now, Little Klaus has one horse and Big Klaus has four, and Little Klaus works for Big Klaus, so once a week Big Klaus lets Little Klaus use his four horses to plow his field in addition to his one. And every time that happens, Little Klaus is like, "Look at my 5 horses, everyone," and calls them all his. And this makes Big Klaus mad because they're not his. He tells Little Klaus stop saying that, and Little Klaus doesn't, so Big Klaus murders his one horse. Little Klaus skins it, puts it in a sack to go sell it. Sets off to sell it, and he comes to this house in the evening where the wife of the farmer won't let him in because she's secretly having the sexton, a clergyman, over. And it's a secret because her husband, the farmer, does not like the sexton. It's also implied that something's going on between her and the sexton because they are drinking lots of wine and eating lots of food. Well, Little Klaus sticks around and sees this through the window or whatever, and the farmer comes home, and so the sexton hides in a trunk, and he and the wife also put all the food and wine in there too. So when the farmer sees Klaus outside, he's like, "Hey, come on in, we'll give you some food." And so while he's in there eating, he accidentally kicks his sack of horse skin and it makes a noise, and so the farmer's like, "What's in there?" And he's like, "A wizard." "Yeah, it's a magic wizard, and he can bring about food and wine magically." The farmer's like, show me where he is." And he's like, "Oh, he's not in my sack anymore. He's in that chest. And he's disguised as a sexton." So the farmer opens it, and when he sees the food and wine and the sexton inside, he thinks there must be a wizard in the sack, so he offers to buy it for 2 bushels of gold. So Klaus sells this worthless horse skin, also buys the chest with the stuff and the sexton in it. So he takes it home, and he gets to a bridge, and he's gonna just throw it over off the river, but then the sexton's like, wait, I can make it worth your while. So the sexton pays him off to not kill him, and so the sexton takes the chest, and Klaus goes home with tons of money. Now, Big Klaus, the guy who killed his horse, says, "Where'd you get all that money?" And he's like, "I sold my horse skin." So Big Klaus kills one of his own horses, takes the skin to town, and demands from all the tanneries that he get that much money. But not only do all the tanners refuse him, but they all beat him with sticks. How dare you try to get that much money from this horse skin? Oh, but it's not over, because Little Klaus's grandma dies, and he didn't really like her, but he's like, now that she's dead, I'll let her spend one night in my bed. And that night, Big Klaus comes in with an axe to murder Little Klaus because he's mad at him, and ends up hacking the dead grandma in the head and leaving, thinking he killed Klaus. Little Klaus does this whole Weekend in Bernie's thing where he takes his dead grandmother to a bar and then gets the bartender to basically hit her in the face by thinking she insulted him, and makes the bartender think he killed her, and so gets all of this hush money from the bartender. So Big Klaus realizes Little Klaus is still alive, and he's like, "You have money again, where'd you get it?" And he's like, "I killed my grandmother and sold her to the local chemists and doctors." So Big Klaus kills his own grandma and tries to sell her, but they're not only like, "No, we don't want her, also you're a murderer," and he has to flee the scene. Finally, Big Klaus has had enough of Little Klaus. He puts him in a sack, and he's gonna go drown him in a river. But he passes a church, and he's like, "I'm gonna leave this sack here for a minute. I gotta go to church before I commit this murder, I guess." So while Little Klaus is stuck in the sack, an old man comes by and hears him inside. Little Klaus is like, "I'm too young to go to heaven," and the old man's like, "I wish I could die and go to heaven. I'm tired of being alive." So Klaus is like, "You want to switch places with me?" And he does. He gets in the sack. Little Klaus goes free. Big Klaus comes back out, murders this guy who apparently wanted it. Oh, before they switched places, the old man made Klaus promise he would take care of his cattle. So Klaus goes and gets the cattle. It's all his now. So he's taking it home. He sees Big Klaus, who again thinks he's killed him and is totally stunned, and says, "Where did you get all that cattle?" So Little Klaus says, "I got it from a mermaid at the bottom of the river. You know, when you threw me in the sack." So Big Klaus says, "Put me in a sack and throw me in. I want free cattle." So he does, and he weighs it down with a stone and he kills him. And as he's walking home, he's like, I don't think he's gonna find any cattle. And that's the end. Now, The Shadow is one of Hans Christian Andersen's most creepy, upsetting stories. It almost seems modern. There is a learned man who wants to be an idealist and write about beauty and poetry, but he's having a hard time making his way in the world. And one day he's just looking at his shadow and he's like, man, Wouldn't it be funny if my shadow like developed a will of its own? But be careful what you wish for, because in the morning he wakes up and his shadow has developed a will of its own. It runs away, and a new shadow actually starts to grow from the tip of the learned man's toes, so he's like, I won't think about it again. But then later, the shadow shows up on his doorstep, and he has grown human in appearance. He's wearing all black, and he's kind of tall and creepy, but he looks like a real person. So they sit down and talk, and the shadow is like, I've had a great life so far because I can slip in the shadows. I can find out everyone's secrets, and I know that humanity is dark and bad, and I use those secrets to gain wealth because I blackmail people because everyone's bad. You, learned man, should not have ideals and believe in beauty because everything is terrible. The learned man's like, no, I'm an idealist. But he continues on and is a poor, suffering artist struggling to survive, and our shadow gets richer and richer. When the learned man gets kind of sick, the shadow's like, hey, let's go to a resort town to get you better. You're poor and you can't pay for it, but I'll pay for it if you pretend to be my shadow. And the learned man doesn't want to do it, but he has to, so he does. So on the trip, the shadow meets and woos this princess who's also at the resort. They decide to get married, and the shadow tells the learned man, I want you to be my shadow permanently now. He's like, isn't it better to live life being my shadow? You can go with me and experience these riches and do everything I do. The learned man refuses and threatens to tell the truth to the princess, so the shadow convinces the princess to have the learned man executed. And she does, and he dies, and his shadow goes on to live a life of pleasure and happiness. Definitely feels like Andersen is saying something about like idealist people like me who just want to write and create art suffer while people with no morals who don't deserve it thrive in life, and isn't that awful? But the concept of your shadow coming to life and then forcing you to be its shadow and then eventually taking your life over is so chilling and cool. Here's one with a happy ending, but a protagonist so unlikable, you kind of don't want him to get it. It's called The Tinderbox. It borrows heavily from 1001 Nights and Aladdin. A soldier's on his way home from war when he meets this witch who's like, if you can climb inside this tree and go into this room of treasures that's inside, I'll let you take all the treasure you want if you bring me my tinderbox back, because I'm old and I can't get in there anymore. And a tinderbox is like a metal or wooden box that keeps flint and things to make fires with in it. There are 3 chambers with all the money, and each one's guarded by a dog in bigger and bigger increments, but the old woman gives him this magic apron that helps him get by the dogs. When he comes back out, he gives the tinderbox to the witch, and he's like, why did you want this? And she's like, I'm not gonna tell you. And he's like, tell me or I'll cut off your head. And she's like, no. So he cuts off her head, takes all the money and the tinderbox, and just kills and robs her. So our guy, who looks way more innocent in this picture than he really is, he uses his wealth to become like this rich man and wear fine clothes. But then he hears that there's this king who has locked his princess daughter away because there was a prophecy she was going to marry a soldier, and the king doesn't want his daughter marrying a lowly soldier. So, put her in prison. Our guy wishes he could see her, but, he can't. In the meantime, he gives all his money out to everyone and is kind of generous and has some redeeming qualities, but then he's poor again. He's got nothing but the tinderbox, so he lights a match from it, and then the first dog from the chamber appears. The dog's like, what can I do for you? And he's like, go get me some money. So the dog goes and steals some money and brings it to him. He learns if he strikes it once, he gets the first dog, twice, second, third, biggest one. So he uses them like wishes to get rich again. And then he's like, maybe I can use them to get that princess. So he sends the biggest dog to bring the princess to him while she's sleeping one night. And while she's asleep, he can't resist and he kisses her on the lips. He sends her back, and the next morning she's like, I had this dream a dog took me and some weird dude kissed me. So the family sets up watch, but he's able to outsmart them 3 more times, kissing the princess every night while she's asleep. Because she's an object to him and he cares nothing for consent, and if this wasn't a children's story, who knows what else he would be doing to her. But eventually they catch him and they're setting him to be hanged for the kidnapping, and I'm kind of like, yeah. But when he's about to be hanged, he asks for his tinderbox one more time, and he summons all 3 dogs, and they murder the king and queen, and the judge and everyone trying to hang him, tear them to pieces. So the crowd is terrified of him and his power, so they're like, we guess you're king now, master. Please don't kill us. So he marries the princess, who I can't imagine wants to marry him after she just watched him murder her whole family, and he gets to be king. Yay. This might be the last fairy tale video I do on TikTok, but you can follow me here on my YouTube channel and on Instagram and my podcast, Folktales and Fairy Lore. The link is in my bio, Andrea Lynn. I'm going to keep making these videos on whatever platforms I can, even if I can't do it here anymore. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who has listened to me tell these stories that I love over the last year or so on TikTok. I never thought anyone would want to just listen to me yap, but what do you know? Also, check out my book, Dust Spells, which is a reimagining of the 12 Dancing Princesses, available everywhere. Thanks again for listening and have a magical day.